September 15th, for the first time a massive drone attack on Kaliningrad.
Will it hit or not? It'll hit.
Unbelievable. Holy shit. God damn it. St. Petersburg and the Leningrad region are under fire. Oil refineries are burning. There are explosions in the sky and panic everywhere.
Well, that is certainly not a very good thing at all.
Russia is threatening Poland by moving Iskander missile systems to the Polish border. And for the first time, Poland is declaring an air raid alert in its cities. And for the first time, it is accepting NATO troops for protection against Russia. Breaking news, friends, September 15th, and for the first time, a powerful drone attack on Kaliningrad. Oil refineries in St. Petersburg and the Leningrad region are burning under attack. There are explosions and panic in the sky. Unbelievable. Holy sh... God damn it! Russia is threatening Poland. It is moving Iskander missile systems to the Polish border. And for the first time, Poland declares an air raid alert in its cities and for the first time accepts NATO troops for protection against Russia. This is an unprecedented decision by Polish President Karol Nawrocki. Friends, this is sensational. Russia is moving Iskander missiles to the Polish border. The Kremlin is demonstrating its readiness to strike and Europe is preparing for the worst-case scenario. There is a state of emergency in Poland itself. NATO troops are being deployed into the country. And an air raid alert has been declared in the east. All of this is happening against the backdrop of drone attacks on Kaliningrad and a strike on the largest oil refinery in the Leningrad region. Today, anxiety hangs not only over Poland, but over all of Europe. The threat of a major war is becoming a reality. Belarus, Kaliningrad, and Russia itself may use this escalation as a launching pad for a strike against NATO. The Baltic countries are first in line. The world is on the brink of a direct confrontation. Exclusive details with Gennady Gudkov right now.
Dasha, I greet you and, of course, all the viewers of your channel.
Gennady Vladimirovich, well, the situation is extraordinary. Iskanders on the border with Poland are no joke. This is a show of force. Drones are flying into Kaliningrad and they say this is a response. Poland, and for the first time, the president of Poland has signed a decree allowing NATO troops to be deployed on Polish territory to defend Poland. We are preparing for a major war in Europe. Look, the Iskanders were there before, they were stationed there. The entire Iskander complex, from missiles that fly up to
900 kilometers is quite far from me, but still it's not the kind of missile that can reach Paris or Madrid. Or Berlin. I don't think it can even reach Berlin. But that's not the point. What matters is that, of course, both sides are making military preparations. And what worries Europe even more right now is the creation and formation of a new military district on the border with Finland. This northwestern military district, which is being re-established, troops are being deployed there, facilities and barracks are being built. Military infrastructure is being created. All of this is right next to the borders of Finland, Latvia, Estonia, and Lithuania. And of course, if strikes are carried out, the Baltic republics will be the first targets. Everyone understands this perfectly well, if it happens at all. Because a long time ago, back in 2019, I think I've told this story many times, Valery Solovey came to see me. At that time, he was still a lecturer at MGIMO, already quite an opposition figure. And so he was telling me about the conversations happening in the Kremlin, about how they were planning to strike the Baltics, and that nothing could be done in time. I didn't fully believe it, even though I've always had a good opinion of Valery Solovey, first and foremost as an intelligent person. But I didn't completely believe it, so I started to double-check. And unfortunately, I received information that indeed, in the Kremlin, maybe there weren't concrete plans, but there were very detailed, serious discussions. What would happen if Russia suddenly invaded the Baltic countries? Or as we used to say back then, the Baltics. What's happening now? Right now, there are processes moving in different directions. The first process is that Europe has seriously begun to rearm. I spoke very recently at a session here of several PACE committees in Paris with some politicians. What are they saying? Yes, we are arming ourselves. Yes, we are now launching the construction of powerful, serious military factories, military infrastructure, warehouses, and so on. Factories are being built in Romania. Factories are being built in Bulgaria. Factories are being built in the Czech Republic. Factories are being built in Germany, and so on. For example, I was in Bulgaria. Just recently, a factory is being built there that will produce 2 million shells per year. 2 million. That's just one factory in Bulgaria. And a huge number, I can't even remember right now. How many tens or hundreds of thousands of tons of gunpowder will be used for explosives, actually? That's it. So preparations are underway. Things are being set up there. Technical control points for all sorts of ships, submarines, aircraft. In other words, Europe is arming itself. Its doctrine is defensive. Right away, let me say, this is not preparation for an attack on Russia because, frankly, in their right mind, in sound mind and good memory, of course, no one would do that. 6,000 nuclear warheads is a pretty serious argument to rule out the idea of attacking Russia in principle. But nevertheless, Europe is seriously arming itself. But what do politicians tell me? You see, we need at least 2 to 3 years. 2 to 3 years. 2 to 3 years after which they could become one of the world's leading military political players. And even then, they can't become a leading military political player for one simple reason. Their nuclear deterrence potential is clearly insufficient for the region. With a rogue regime, which is Russia with its 6,000 warheads, that's 6,000 including both operational and operational tactical warheads in storage. There are about as many strategic warheads as the US has, around 2,000. Now, China's nuclear potential is rapidly increasing. They have practically tripled it in just the past few years. And now they have a program which they talk about quite openly, aiming for over 1,000. That is more than 1,000 strategic nuclear warheads. This signifies that China is effectively becoming the third major state with a massive nuclear capability. For comparison, France and Britain together have a total of about 600 nuclear warheads capable of reaching targets. Territory of Russia, for example. But as for China, I don't know, probably even less there. That's why the situation here is such that the imbalance in nuclear armaments is absolutely obvious. Therefore, of course, Europe will engage in dialogue with the United States of America, no matter what it takes. Because they believe that the return of the US to normalcy is, in general, a goal that must be kept in mind. Trump comes and goes, but America will return. I generally agree with this concept because America is a great country with vast, long-standing traditions, enormous capabilities, and resources. And it's too early to write off the United States of America. Of course, that's not right. That's why Europe hopes that the balance of power will be restored. But it really has committed to a rearmament program for about 10 years, somewhere around 10 to 12 trillion euros. So when they reached that 5% threshold and made the announcement, by the way, Putin got very nervous when Europe decided to allocate 5% of its GDP to defense, because in that case, Europe would probably end up with the largest military budget, even surpassing the United States. Well, that would be about 1 trillion, maybe a bit more, in annual expenditures. Right now, they haven't reached that figure yet, but they're already allocating significant amounts for military production. I remember when the first tranche was distributed, the first tranche was 150 billion euros. That's substantial. That's the entire military budget of Russia. So that's the situation. On the one hand, Europe is arming itself. On the one hand, Europe is ready to put up a fight. On the one hand, Europe is now going to rebuild its armies. On the one hand, Europe is deploying troops at the request of the Polish government to set an example onto its own territory where Article 5 applies. On the other hand, Europe is showing that it is not ready for war right now. And Putin understands this perfectly well. I've mentioned this more than once on your program when Bulgarian politicians, as they say, described in vivid detail their meeting with Putin. This was in 2019. I know people who met and spoke with him. They say, so we came, for a meeting in Sochi, basically to show that we didn't want to worsen relations with Russia. At that time, they installed on Kaliakra, a prominent rocky cape jutting far out into the sea. They set up a surveillance system on Kaliakra to monitor military ships and so on. And well, they said, no, this is within the framework of NATO. It's not our own initiative. So Putin listened to them. He smiled and said, well, go ahead. What's the issue? Go ahead. What's the problem? Do all that. We know everything. We're watching you closely. That's it. And then he opened up and said, to be honest, we don't really see Europe as a serious military adversary. Well, the Bulgarians were a bit surprised and asked, why is that? He said, let me explain it to you in simple terms. I'm simplifying the retelling of that conversation. And he started to explain simple things very thoroughly and, so to speak, knowledgeably. He said, look, how many tanks do we have in service? There are 12 of them. But after all, each tank means ammunition, targeting systems, technical repairs, maintenance, its own armaments, and so on. How about the 12th one? How many armored vehicles do you have? You produce 37 armored vehicles, and each country makes its own vehicles, so to speak. How many multiple rocket launcher systems do you have? How many combat aircraft do you have in service? They say you can't create a unified army without standardization, and you still don't have that standardization, nor is it expected. And that's why we, so to speak, are calm about Europe. We understand perfectly well that there are NATO standards, and yes, NATO standards, so to speak, are clearly, in terms of their potential, significantly superior to ours. That's why we don't really consider Europe a serious military adversary. Putin said this in 2019 in Sochi. He said this in particular to the Bulgarian political delegation that was there on various issues. That's it. And indeed, Europe did not anticipate that it would need to create its own army. And creating an army means a unified command of ground forces, a unified command of naval forces, a unified command of missile forces, air defense, and so on and so forth. That means having their own standards, their own system of commissioning, and so on. But who, for example, would agree to that? If the Swedes produce their own aircraft, for example, they won't agree to stop making it just because the French are producing their Rafale. So, of course, there are problems in Europe. But now Europe is going to spend a lot on armaments. Now we move on to the question of Ukraine. What will happen to Ukraine, and to what extent is Europe capable of replacing the United States of America? At the moment, it is not capable because a huge amount of weaponry, training, and exercises, as well as technical infrastructure, has been supplied to Ukraine by the United States of America. And that's why Europe is very afraid of scaring off the fragile agreement with Trump regarding the purchase of weapons from the US. I once had a conversation there, but I won't mention names now. I try not to name politicians. But we were talking with a very serious politician from Germany, and he said, we are discussing this. I don't really like Trump. I don't trust him at all. So I said, well, Trump is back and forth, He said, yes, we all understand. We understand. Right now, we don't need to discuss this. As long as he agreed to sell us weapons, that's all we need from him. Let them sell us weapons and we'll handle the rest ourselves. So that's basically the attitude. And many politicians in Europe feel the same way about the current situation in the United States of America. Let them at least sell to us. Let the money flow. We're ready to pay. Just let them sell to us, because rearming Ukraine, switching now to Western models, European models, switching from American ones is a huge headache and takes a lot of time. And honestly, it's all wrong anyway. That's why, for now, there won't be a war with NATO. Putin will provoke, will try to scare Europe, will continue to escalate tensions and carry out provocations. It's quite possible that there will be provocations. They could even happen in Moldova. Right now, they have elections there on September 28th. At the moment, some people there, so to speak, our people, my comrades, even Dmitri's eldest son is in Moldova now, to see this threat with his own eyes, to see the pro-Putin forces there and somehow oppose them. We understand how important these elections are. We understand how crucial the current political situation in Romania is, which in a sense also finds itself isolated. So it turns out that both Bulgaria and Romania are closer to here. Poland, of course, yes. But what about Poland? Poland is a serious country. Not only will there be NATO troops there soon, but Poland itself is a serious country. It's large in terms of territory, and its population isn't small either. It's close to 40 million. Poland, plus there are over 4 million migrants living there, and a lot of migrants from Ukraine as well, who also, generally speaking, will not just sit idly by. Naturally, it's unlikely that Putin will try his luck in Poland, But the Baltic countries are indeed experiencing a lot of fear right now because they're small. Their armies are small. Their territory is small. Of course, you can see it's just 40 kilometers across. People could wake up and see tanks standing in their courtyards or armored vehicles. And this fear, of course, is very real. So, absolutely, yes. Will Putin stop? That's the question. I believe he won't. I believe Putin will not stop. This mistaken policy has already led to Putin becoming emboldened. He already perceives any civilized negotiations or contacts as cowardice and weakness, as a surrender of positions. A long time ago, he said at a Kremlin meeting, "Why are you fussing? Time is on our side." Back then, I thought it was funny that time was working for Putin. But unfortunately, over this time, he really has managed to mobilize the military-industrial complex. The worst thing he managed to do. And this is Trump's fault, breaking through international isolation and returning to official politics as a leader, a military leader, and so on. A big and completely deranged country that is waging war against Ukraine, that is the saddest outcome. And so now what are they thinking if, for example, they end the war now on their own terms? They already sense the West's weakness, that the West is wavering. And now they will try to push harder to pressure Putin. By the way, why are these attacks so intense right now? Why are there so many shellings? Putin has been convinced that Ukraine, on the terms that they will dictate to the world. That's their dream. And so, after that, of course, what will they do? I suppose I understand they won't reduce their strong army. They won't withdraw their strong army from the territory of Ukraine. It's like they need this tension, so to speak, provocation, all sorts of chaotic shootouts to keep the army there, so that these 500 or 600,000 thugs don't return to the country. Or if they do return, then slowly, in batches, so to speak, in small numbers, so as not to trigger internal bloodshed in the country. This criminal crisis, this huge surge in crime. And they also won't significantly reduce military production. First of all, they will objectively be replenishing their stock of equipment, destroying things, and so on. And in order not to immediately cut off this funding, which many Russian regions rely on, especially those with military enterprises that are city forming, they won't do that. In other words, they will maintain the same obviously high spending on defense and security, even in the absence of active hostilities, but definitely not below 5.5 to 6%. Well, 5.5% for sure. That's it. And then they will start their hybrid actions in various regions. This includes Georgia, Armenia, no need to consult a fortune teller, Moldova, where they are building up their presence, and possibly, if they manage to reach an agreement with China, or at least feel that there won't be any serious or harsh retaliatory actions, it could be Kazakhstan with its so-called northern territories, and so on. Then later on, this could happen, but that's just my assumption. And then it could be the Baltic countries, Finland, Poland, and so on. If they sense something there, well, the Baltic countries are in the most, of all the NATO countries, they are in the greatest danger, the most serious risk, because there they could play the card of protecting the so-called Russian-speaking population. This is very dangerous. Well, that's my view of how the war is developing in general, the direction it's moving in. What possible scenarios there are for the continuation of this war, and the fact that as long as Putin maintains his political dominance and remains in the Kremlin, this war will continue. Well, sorry for such a long monologue, but we haven't seen each other in a while, so I decided to share my view of the political and military situation.
Gennady Vladimirovich, I agree with many of your statements, especially about Europe's weakness, and I'd like us to focus on that. So right now, this is the picture we're seeing. Trump is trying to distance himself, saying, these aren't my problems. Europe buys oil and gas from Russia. Stop buying, and then I'll impose sanctions. If you don't stop, I won't impose any additional sanctions. That's your problem. You yourself said that Europe is incapable of standing up to Russia. It's afraid because Russia is a nuclear power. And here's the question. It turns out that Europe, the collective West, and even Donald Trump himself are pushing Russia toward even greater aggressive expansion, toward an even more predatory war. How is it even possible to stop Putin today? Because it gives the impression that the collective West, that is, the NATO countries, specifically the US and Europe, are incapable of doing so. They are very afraid, they are impotent. They can't even attack the airfields from which, for example, Russia's tactical or strategic aviation took off, or the storage sites for drones, from where, for instance, those drones were launched at them. Because those drones were flying toward Polish military targets. If it were Russia, if, for example, Poland attacked Russia, then Russia would destroy Poland's key military bases that very same day. They would have responded.
Well, look, it all comes down to the American administration, which essentially has given up all its positions. I would even say they've betrayed Ukraine. And overall, in my opinion, Trump today looks like a much greater ally of Putin and, to a significant extent, let's say, almost an enemy of Ukraine. And this, of course, has seriously undermined the bloc, seriously damaged the overall, so to speak, camp of resistance to Putin, and has caused a major rift in relations between Europe and the United States of America, as well as within the NATO military political alliance. Kasparov was on either today or yesterday. I haven't had a chance to listen to him yet, though. But the very title of his broadcast, something like The Funeral of NATO, The Collapse of NATO, or The Degradation of NATO, something along those lines, already says a lot. Indeed, the military political alliance is bursting at the seams. The United States and Europe have different positions, very different ones. If Europe were stronger, it would probably support Ukraine even more. They will support Ukraine. They have no other choice. Europe has no way out. Right now, they're just looking for forms, methods, and ways to avoid a nuclear catastrophe, but still give a worthy response to the aggressor. And here they are always late. As for the states, I agree with Western politicians here. We shouldn't count on them in their current state. The main thing is that they keep selling weapons. Nothing more should be expected from them right now, since that's impossible. Trump is an ally of Putin. He's not just an ally of Putin. In fact, he's also an ally of Lukashenko. I even call him a strong, good leader over there. I truly don't know. Perhaps he has simply and completely lost his mind, his grasp on reality. Or it could be that he is merely playing the role of a foolish individual, perhaps to satisfy some deeply ingrained, rather peculiar and complex psychological quirks of his very own personality. But he also has a soft spot for Kim Jong-un. And he skipped all those gatherings in Beijing dedicated to the 80th anniversary of the war. That was clearly anti-American, anti-European. The so-called forum is a gathering of leaders from totalitarian states around the world. So, what can we say? Of course, Europe has a different position. But Europe is restrained by Russia's nuclear potential. And of course, how do you end the war? The war could have been ended right away and should have been ended by force long ago. By inflicting defeat, let me emphasize, everyone needs to get these ideas out of their heads. All these thoughts about marching to Moscow, all of that needs to be discarded. They're harmful and get in the way of absolutely everyone. But it was necessary to inflict defeat on the aggressors on the territory of Ukraine. And they were obligated to give Ukraine, a Western country, as much weaponry, equipment, technology, logistics, and so on, as needed to inflict a serious defeat on the aggressors on Ukrainian territory. This should have been done a long time ago. We've been saying for a long time that Putin understands no language except the language of force. He doesn't even understand Russian well, because he believes that everything he says is right. And as for what others say, he doesn't understand at all what they're talking about. That's why he doesn't understand any language except the language of force. And there is no other way to inflict defeat on the aggressor, to force him to retreat, to make him think, to make him realize that tomorrow could be even worse. There is absolutely no other viable option available. I am truly amazed at the many Western politicians who are still seemingly stuck back in July of last year when it comes to their understanding and approach regarding Vladimir Putin. But a lot of time has been lost, many opportunities have been missed, and many mistakes have been made by everyone along this path. And as a result of these mistakes, of the wrong strategy and tactics chosen, we are now seeing it's an absolutely dire situation, essentially a stalemate, where it's hard to find the right way out. Trump dreams of Ukraine surrendering. That's clear. And he's going to play the fool. Essentially, he's going to support Putin because he understands that in that case, the entire strategy would have to change. If you want to hurt Putin, you have to change your strategy. But he chose a different strategy, a strategy for Ukraine's defeat, and he doesn't want to back down from it. Well, as long as he's selling weapons, that's all that matters to him. In general, we should already forget about Trump as an ally of the Democratic camp and frankly as someone who defends the free world everywhere. We just need to forget about him. Let America deal with him on its own, whether they can handle him or not, whether they let him continue or not. They won't let him steer things in that direction. That's something we probably won't be able to influence. But Europe, in any case, undeniably remains the primary resource and the steadfast main ally of Ukraine. And everything that's being done now is, first and foremost, thanks to Europe's consistently strong and unwavering position, which sincerely considers itself to be the principal and most crucial ally of Ukraine in its fight against the aggressor. What will Europe do? How capable will it be of mobilizing right now? It's hard to say. Europe is torn by internal contradictions. And that's very bad. Because there is no unity. There is no unity, and the situation is pre-war. Unfortunately, something similar happened in the 1930s as well. Well, we'll see. I'm not a pessimist. I believe that Putin also has serious problems. Serious problems with the economy, serious problems with finances, serious problems with regional budgets, serious problems with the development of industries, and with social programs. This can't go on forever. It will inevitably lead to something serious, which could seriously affect the very existence of the Putin regime.
Gennady Vladimirovich, to wrap up our stream today, many economic experts claim that Putin has a problem with the economy, that it is collapsing, and that this will not allow him to wage war against Ukraine for very long. But I, for example, believe that in dictatorial countries, unfortunately, economic problems do not affect the conduct of military operations. I believe that Putin is capable of waging a long, exhausting war against Ukraine. What is your view, and figuratively speaking, how can Putin be forced to stop, withdraw from Ukrainian territory, and end the war?
Well, unfortunately, you are right. It's like in the old Soviet joke, Dad, vodka has gotten more expensive. Will you drink less now? No, son, now you'll just eat less, right? That's why, unfortunately, it's like this in dictatorial countries. They take away from the population everything that needs to be taken and throw it into the war. What should be done? Increase military resistance to the aggressors. There is no other way. No other way. Because yes, you are absolutely right. When the economy is being redistributed into military sectors, of course, there are huge problems. Of course, those problems are growing. And of course, they are already starting to show. But this is just the beginning. But apparently, there is no economic way to end the war. The only option is for oil to collapse down to $40 per barrel. Then yes, then Putin will suddenly feel, so to speak, a sharp financial deficit and, so to speak, a huge surge of discontent within the country. But as we can see, that hasn't happened yet. Russian oil is still being bought and it's impossible to replace it. You see, our economists did a lot. They made a lot of proposals, even at the very beginning of the war. They made proposals to the Americans, to the Europeans, voiced their position, saying, guys, don't do it. Trying to push Russian oil out of the world market is simply impossible. It's like trying to turn the moon around to face the other side. It's just not possible according to the laws of gravity, energy, and so on. Russian oil accounts for 15% of the global energy balance. Removing it would cause such a collapse, such a crisis. So, let's introduce a special tax on purchases of Russian oil and gas, and give this tax to Ukraine so that it has the finances for everything it needs. For purchasing weapons, arming the army, rebuilding infrastructure, logistics, creating new industries, and so on. And our economists calculated at the time that Ukraine would receive between $100 and $150 billion a year just from this special tax on the purchase of Russian oil. But as soon as you listen to anyone, no one actually implemented it. They just imposed sanctions. As a result, India used to buy 1% Russian oil in its energy mix, and now it buys 33%. In other words, the oil that used to go to other markets from the Arab world is now going to Europe. So what happened was simply a redirection of oil flows. And now we are looking for an economic solution. At the moment, unfortunately, the economic solution is indeed the right one. For at least several more years, Putin can continue to spend over 70% of GDP on the war, to wage war. Ukraine itself does not have such resources, reserves, or resilience. This must be large-scale assistance from the entire world. This is a new lend-lease, a serious lend-lease. Only then will something be possible. But we see that the world is hesitating, excuse me for not using parliamentary language. And these are truly the most difficult, the most serious problems today. There needs to be identification and expansion of military aid to Ukraine first and foremost. There is no other option. I am constantly urging both Western politicians to understand this, as well as journalists who influence public opinion and public organizations and all sorts of different forums and so on. We are explaining that Putin will not stop. He is operating within a paradigm of a country that must constantly be at war. Otherwise, he won't be able to hold on to power. He will not be able to stay in power. And for him, this is the key issue. For him, the key issue is not the war itself, but holding on to power. That's all there is to it. And since today, power can be maintained through war or by actively preparing for it, he will continue to do so. This is absolutely obvious. That's why right now Europe still needs to mobilize as much as possible and provide Ukraine with everything necessary so that it can at least grind down the enemy. You see, I keep saying that you are giving Ukraine the means to defend itself, but you are not giving Ukraine the means to attack. And defending for a prolonged period of 3.5 years is an extraordinarily difficult, profoundly challenging, and deeply impactful moral and psychological ordeal that relentlessly pushes the entire undertaking to the absolute outermost limits of human endurance and resilience, demanding immense fortitude from all involved. Ukraine needs to be given a military technical advantage. It should be given enough to create an advantage, not just parity that would only help Ukraine defend itself against further advances by the enemy. This is what needs to be done. For now, at the level of conventional weapons, this can and should be done. Europe has resources, they do. They may not be ready for a major war with China, but they are definitely ready for a war with conventional weapons against Russia. We also sometimes overestimate Russia's military capabilities. Here, we shouldn't fall into either extreme. Triumphalist attitudes and overestimating, thinking there's some gigantic military power there that's unmatched, impossible to stop, and so on and so forth. These are the two extremes that only make things worse for making a very important right decisions. The military path. Well, unfortunately, I repeat myself like Panama because I just don't see any other option.
Friends, please like this video, leave a few kind words in the comments to support Ukraine, and share your thoughts about our conversation today with Gennady Vladimirovich.
Thank you.